Hey everyone, today we're going to make a giant gummy Coca-Cola bottle weighing a whopping 270 kilograms. But before we get started, we need to study the original. Inside the pack, there's a handful of tiny little gummy bottles. For their size, they're actually pretty detailed. There are also larger versions of gummy Coke bottles out there, but we're aiming for something way bigger, almost as tall as I am. You won't find anything like this in any store in the world. First, let's try the original to really understand its taste down to every little nuance. The flavor is very rich and perfectly balanced. Of course, the strongest note is the flavoring itself, that classic Coca-Cola aroma. It might seem logical to just make gummy candy straight from the actual drink, but after a ton of experiments, I found out that using real Coke doesn't work. Once you turn it into a gummy, it loses 90% of its flavor, so we're gonna recreate the Coca-Cola flavor from scratch. The exact recipe is a secret the manufacturers keep to themselves, but if you really pay attention to the smell of Coke, you'll notice it's a citrus drink. That's why we need an entire crate of limes and lemons and a crate of oranges. Interestingly, we won't be using the fruit's pulp this time because that's not where the smell comes from. All the aroma is in the essential oils trapped inside the peel. Those oils burst out when you press on the peel's tiny oil glands. But before we start zesting the fruit, we need to thoroughly clean their surfaces. So we'll start by dumping them into the sink. We won't be using any detergents, just give them a good scrub under warm water. Once they're clean, we lay them out in metal trays. And with the fruits clean, it's time to peel them using a vegetable peeler. This is by far the best way to get that top aromatic layer of zest without digging into the bitter white pith underneath. Now we're keeping the zest only since we don't need the pulp, and we're going to do the exact same thing with the lemons. So we finished peeling the remaining oranges and lemons, and we've got ourselves a pretty decent pile of zest. But to extract the essential oils more efficiently, we need to chop it up. And for this, we're going to use a knife blender. We load in the first batch of citrus peel, cover it with a lid, and start blending. One minute in the blender is more than enough. What we get is a medium-sized grind. The smell immediately gets 10 times stronger. Then we transfer the ground zest into a large jar. Now we load up the next batch of peel and blend it again. This way we run all the citrus peel through the blender. Now that's done, but we still have the limes left. Since they're small, it's easier to zest them by hand using a grater. We scrape each lime gently in one spot, being careful not to dig into the bitter white pith. We only want that fragrant green zest. We keep going, zesting the limes until they're completely bare. 20 minutes later, it's all done. We put a mountain of lime zest into the large jar. The next thing that will help us make the Coca-Cola flavoring is kaffir lime leaves. These leaves have a grassy, citrusy aroma. Toss them into the jar as well. Now for the spices. Probably the most important spice in Coca-Cola's flavor profile is cinnamon. We add 4 sticks of it to a mortar, and the second key spice is coriander. First, we're going to break the cinnamon sticks into smaller pieces. Then we're going to grind them down to release as much essential oil as possible. Once that's done, into the jar they go. Another essential element of Coke's aroma is nutmeg. We need it whole, not pre-ground. Using the finest grater, we grate 3 whole nutmegs. Now, since essential oils are very volatile, it's important to use freshly ground spices and then add them to the jar as well. At this point, the jar contains all of the components of our Coca-Cola flavoring, but we need to bring them all together into a unified taste. And for that, we use food-grade glycerin. It's the perfect solvent for essential oils. Open the bottle and pour the entire thing into the jar. Now it's time to give everything a good mix. We want the glycerin to fully coat all of our aromatic ingredients, so the extraction process is as effective as possible. And that's it. We close the lid to keep the essential oils from evaporating, and now we let this mixture infuse for a full 7 days. Next up, we're tackling what's often labeled on Coke bottles as caffeine flavor, but that's actually just a marketing trick. In reality, Coca-Cola contains pure caffeine, which doesn't have any smell. Its job is to give the drink a kick of energy and a slightly astringent aftertaste. We're going to extract pure caffeine from ground guarana seeds. Guarana contains about 7% caffeine. That's 3 times more than coffee beans. So we're going to open up a pack of guarana powder and pour the entire contents into the jar. To pull the caffeine out of the powder, we're going to use food-grade alcohol. We're going to open the bottle and pour it into the jar. Now we're going to give it a good stir, making sure all the guarana powder gets soaked with the alcohol. That's it. We're going to cover it and let it sit for 24 hours. Over that time, the alcohol will extract nearly all of the caffeine and bitterness from the powder. Then to get rid of the bitterness, we're going to use activated charcoal. We need 4 tablets. Drop them into the jar and stir them well. We're going to let it sit for 2 hours. During this time, the charcoal will absorb all the bitterness like a sponge. Done. The charcoal has done its job. Now it's time to filter everything out, and for that, I'm going to use a coffee filter. It's fine enough to catch even the smallest bits of powder. The process is very slow, but after a half an hour, we've got our caffeine extract from the guarana. Now we need to get rid of the alcohol, and for that, we're going to pour the liquid into a saucepan and then simply evaporate it. In the end, we should be left with a thick paste. Then we take it off the heat and pour it onto parchment paper. This paste right here is pure caffeine. This amount is enough for a huge batch of Coca-Cola. It'll harden up and we'll use it later. Now, let's get back to our Coca-Cola flavoring. It's been a little over 24 hours since we made it, so we need to give it another stir to help extract even more aroma. We'll be doing this every day. There are 6 more days to go. While the flavoring is infusing, we're going to start working on the mold for our gummy bottle, and we're going to use this actual bottle as a reference. So it's time to hop over to the computer and create a 3D model for the mold matrix. After 4 hours of work, this is what we've got, an exact replica of a gummy Coke bottle, though I'm going to replace the label with an original design. We've saved the finished project onto a flash drive, and now we're going to take it to a place where we know they can make a proper mold for us. We've arrived at a friend's home workshop, and he's the perfect person to help us out since he's got a CNC milling machine, exactly what we need. For the mold matrix, we're choosing expanded polystyrene. It's lightweight, cheap, and less porous than regular styrofoam. However, a single sheet isn't big enough for our mold, so we need to add a second sheet like this. To bond them together, we're going to use expanding foam adhesive, and we're going to apply it evenly across all the surfaces and then press them together. To make sure everything sticks together securely, we're going to press the sheets under weight and then fill in any tiny gaps with more expanding foam. Then we're going to leave it dry for an hour, and then once it's dry, we're going to use a saw to cut off any excess material. On top, we're going to place a sheet of plywood and screw it firmly onto the polystyrene. that's it, the blank is ready to move. We're going to carefully place it onto the milling table and then secure it with special clamps. The CNC machine is controlled through this computer, so we're going to plug in our flash drive. And the CNC operator has split our 3D model into 3 parts along its length. The first tool to get to work is the largest milling bit. Its job is to remove excess height so that later the molding parts will fit together perfectly like puzzle pieces. This step creates a huge amount of shavings, which are vacuumed up by an industrial-sized vacuum cleaner. Now it's time to swap in a medium-sized milling bit. Its task is to carve out the actual bottle shape from the solid sheet. That's it, we no longer need this frame. Now it's time for the third and final tool change. This time, we're switching to a precision milling bit with a very fine tip. This is the one that does all of the detail work, bringing the blank to millimeter accuracy, exactly according to the parameters that we set on the computer. This process takes a lot of time. Just working on this single blank will take 5 hours. The first and simplest blank is done. There are still 2 more to go, however, and they're much more complex. The CNC machine ran non-stop for 2 whole days. Finally, the last piece of our mold matrix has been cut out. This means that we're ready for assembly. We start by evenly applying expanding foam adhesive to the bottom layer. Then we're going to glue on the second layer. It's important to spread the foam across the entire surface for an even bond. And then next we're going to apply more foam on top for the second layer. And then finally, we attach the final and third layer of the matrix. We're going to press the whole assembly firmly against the table and then let it sit for 1 hour. After the adhesive is dried, we end up with a nice-looking polystyrene bottle. It looks exactly like my 3D model, but it's not perfect yet. We need to trim off all the excess foam that's sticking out. Right now, the surface of the matrix is too rough, and that won't work for us, so we're going to sand off the coarse fibers using sandpaper. And then we need to blow off all that dust. Next comes the puttying stage. We need to fill in all the gaps and seams to get a perfectly smooth matrix. Now after the first putty layer, we sand again. Then we're going to apply a second layer of putty. Sand once more. And then finally coat the whole thing with a water-based varnish to protect the matrix without damaging it. One final sanding, and then blow off the remaining dust. After 3 days of work, the matrix is ready, and now it's time to head back to the studio. We've got the matrix, but now we need to turn it into a mold that can actually hold liquid gummy. So we're going to lay the matrix on top of an OSB board wrapped in plastic wrap. The next step is to pour in the silicone. But before we do that, we need to make sure that it won't stick to the matrix, and that's why I bought a special release agent. We're going to open up 2 bottles, pour them into a spray container, and then of course attach the sprayer. Now using the spray bottle, we coat the entire surface of the matrix. We need to spray extra on the lettering since that's the most textured part of the bottle. Now that's finished, it's time to mix the silicone. The first component is silicone resin. We're going to measure out the right amount on the scales to make sure the mixture gets set properly. We need 3 kilograms of resin. The second component is the hardener. We need much less of this. Only 90 grams. Now, to mix everything, I'm going to use a power drill with a dough whisk attachment. I'm going to blend the resin and hardener together for a full 10 minutes. And once that's done, the silicone gets much thicker. Now we're ready to pour it. We're going to pour it as evenly as possible, making sure the silicone covers the matrix thoroughly and as little as possible drips onto the floor. We'll use a roller to spread it out evenly. Now, if there are any spots we missed, we simply add more silicone there. I calculated the mix so that it's just enough to cover the matrix in a single even layer. Finally, we're going to turn on the air conditioner to heating mode to help the silicone cure faster. After 8 hours, the silicone has hardened, but of course we need to make many more layers like this. Before moving on though, I want to protect the Coca-Cola lettering. Since the next layer will be plaster, we need to make sure that it won't stick too much and it can be separated easily later on. Now to do this, I'm going to simply cover that section with gauze and then continue pouring more silicone. I'm going to do the same thing for the textured part of the bottle cap as well. 2 days later, we've used up 2 large cans of silicone, and this stage is finally complete. As I mentioned earlier, the next layer will be plaster. To reinforce it, we need to use gauze. We're going to unroll the gauze and then cut it into manageable strips. We're going to need a lot of these. Now onto the plaster. We're going to open up the bag and scoop the plaster out with a shovel. We're going to add it gradually into water while constantly mixing with a construction mixer attachment. All right, the plaster mix is ready, and so we're going to take a piece of gauze, unfold it, and then fully soak it into the plaster mixture. Once it's saturated, we can start covering the silicone layer. We've applied 3 layers and the plaster is hardened really quickly. So now it's time to build a support box. We're going to assemble it using screws. The box is ready, and so next we need to fill in all the empty space inside so that the mold can withstand the enormous weight of the gummy. The simplest solution is to use expanding foam. We're going to attach the application gun to the foam canister and then start filling up the box with foam. We left a bit of empty space because the foam expands as it cures, and so now we need to just wait a full day. The next day, I came back to check, and it looked like the foam had hardened. Although on the right side, some strange coral-like formations had grown out, and so we're going to use a saw to cut off these excess blobs. Though oddly enough, the saw started getting stuck in the foam, so let's see what's going on inside. That explains it. The foam hasn't fully cured yet. It looks like with this much volume, it's going to need a lot more time. So after waiting another day, the foam has finally fully cured. Now we can get back to what we couldn't finish yesterday, which was trimming the foam down to the level of the box walls. There, now we can put the lid on. As the foam expanded, it pushed the walls outward, so to secure the bottom, we pressed them tightly together. We're going to do this all the way around the perimeter. Now it's time to flip the box over on the other side. We're going to unscrew all the screws and remove the corner supports. We're also going to remove the lid itself. Now it's time to take out the silicone mold. Underneath, we now have a solid support structure made of plaster and expanding foam that should be able to handle the heavy weight of the gummy. I think everything should work out just fine. Back to the silicone mold. We need to separate it from the matrix since this is where the gummy will go later. Thanks to the release agent, the silicone peels off easily. I think the silicone captured all the mold details really well. Now we're going to cover the plaster form with plastic wrap to ensure that it's completely sealed and leak-proof. Then we're going to place the silicone mold back into position. It fits perfectly, but some of the silicone has seeped under the matrix, creating bits that we don't need, so we're going to trim those off with scissors. And of course, before it comes into contact with any food, we thoroughly wash the mold with dish soap. Now that that's done, it's time to get back to our flavoring. It is finally infused for 7 full days, and it's time to check out the aroma. This is very close to the Coca-Cola scent. I'd say about 80% accurate. To get a pure flavoring extract, we strain the whole mixture using cheesecloth. We're going to pour everything from the jar onto the cloth. Then we're going to gather it up into a bag and start squeezing out the glycerin along with all of those essential oils. I spent a long time carefully squeezing out every last drop because we need every bit of that natural flavoring. Now that that's done, we're going to pour it into a measuring cup. In total, we've got 600 milliliters of powerful flavor concentrate. This will be the main component of the taste in our future gummy. It's finally time to make it. The original gummies have two colors, so we're going to need two burners. On the first one, we're going to set a pot for the lighter colored gummy, and then on the second, a giant cauldron for the large batch of dark gummy. But how do we make sure our gummy has the same chewy, stretchy texture as the original? That's thanks to glucose syrup. This is the primary ingredient in gummy candies. We bought a huge amount of glucose syrup. So let's unpack the box and cut open the syrup bags directly over the pot. Then we're going to squeeze out the remaining syrup by hand. Then we're going to pour the syrup from smaller buckets also. As for the rest of the syrup, it goes straight into the giant cauldron. That is a whopping 64 kilograms of syrup. Our next ingredient is sugar. We're going to need a lot of that too, so we're going to open up these bags. We're going to pour the entire first bag of sugar into the cauldron. For the pot, we're going to add a bit less sugar. Next, we're going to add water, but just enough to wet the sugar. Under the cauldron, we're going to crank the heat up to maximum. This will help the sugar at the bottom slightly burn, giving us that caramel aroma and the rich color that we want. After about an hour, though, the caramel starts boiling vigorously. But then the worst happened, and the foam suddenly rose up, and hot caramel began spilling all over the floor. But it's not a disaster. I had calculated the ingredient amounts with a little extra precisely for emergencies like this, so we still have enough to fill the mold. Now it's time to turn on the burner under the pot, but we're going to keep it at a lower heat because we want to get a lighter caramel color there. At this point, we're cooking 2 batches of caramel at the same time, so it's crucial not to overheat them. We're going to be using thermometers to keep everything under control. So we've heated the caramel to the target temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. It's time to turn off the burners. The caramel is ready, but to turn it into gummy, we need to add gelatin. Now to prepare this properly, we need 3 containers and 3 large bottles of water. We're going to pour more water into the first 2 containers and then less into the third one. Now we're going to bring out a full 25-kilogram bag of gelatin. Using a scale, we measure out the exact amount that we need. We're going to start pouring the gelatin into the water, constantly stirring with a large whisk to prevent lumps from forming. We need to incorporate the entire bag of gelatin into these 3 containers. Now that that's done, we're going to start with the smallest container. We're going to move it closer to the pot and begin adding the swollen gelatin. Now, while stirring continuously, we need to fully dissolve it into the hot caramel. It wasn't quick, but after a half an hour, it was done. Now we're going to repeat the same process with the large batch of dark gummy. The cauldron is filled up to the brim, so we decided to dissolve all the gelatin now, hoping the volume will reduce enough for us to add the rest from the containers. We've dissolved everything now, but unfortunately the volume didn't shrink as much as we'd hoped. We still need to add half of the remaining gelatin. This means that we're going to have to scoop out the excess from the cauldron. This volume needs to be just right. We're going to add the remaining gelatin and then stir it in until it's completely dissolved. Now we've got liquid gummy, but it's still flavorless, so it's time to add our homemade Coca-Cola flavoring. We're going to pour 1/3 into the small pot and 2/3 into the large cauldron. Next, we're going to take our pure caffeine slab and cut it into a large piece and a smaller piece. We're going to drop these into their respective containers, and then to balance the sweetness, we're going to use phosphoric acid, the same ingredient used in real Coca-Cola. Precision matters here. We're going to measure out 1/3 of the bottle and pour that into the light-colored liquid gummy, and then the rest goes into the cauldron. After dissolving the gelatin in the dark caramel, its color turned out too light. We're going to need to fix that. The original Coca-Cola uses caramel color E150, so we bought the exact same kind. Let's open it up and then add a bit. Now we're going to mix the mixture thoroughly to ensure all the components are evenly distributed. Because of the flavoring, the light gummy has taken on a yellowish tint, so we're going to stir the dark gummy as well. The final step before pouring is to remove the foam. The dark gummy has a lot of it. Everything's ready for the pour, and so now we're going to move the mold closer to our containers. To make sure the gummy comes out of the silicone easily later, we're going to use a spray-on release agent. Just spray it all over the surface. To separate the colors as we need, we're going to place a divider right behind the Coca-Cola lettering in the mold. We start pouring the dark gummy first. As soon as it touches the divider, we're going to add the light gummy to the other side. The idea is to constantly balance the levels on both sides so that the gummies don't mix together. We're going to keep pouring until we fill the mold to the top. Now we're going to remove the divider. Unfortunately, everything mixed together. I was pretty upset because when I tested this with small batches, it worked perfectly. But we'll just have to leave the gummy to set. After 3 whole days, it's finally hardened. The texture is just right, exactly like store-bought gummy candy. To get it out of the mold, we're going to cover it with a lid. Then we're going to secure it by screwing down the corner brackets on all sides. We're going to flip it straight onto a tray because there's no way we'll be able to lift this mega gummy any other way. All right, now it's time to unscrew everything. We're going to lift the mold. And we no longer need the plastic wrap. And now the moment of truth, separating the silicone from the gummy. Success! The Coca-Cola logo turned out absolutely perfect. Even the finer details like the bottle cap and all the folds came out beautifully. It took us a full 10 days to make this giant gummy Coca-Cola bottle. Let's compare it to the original. Sadly, ours doesn't have the two-tone color split, but thanks to the authentic lettering, it actually looks even better than the original gummy bottle. After calculating the weight of all the ingredients we used, the total weight of our giant gummy Coke came out to 270 kilograms. Just look at how huge it is compared to me. Inside this bag is the amount of money we spent to make this giant Coke. In total, that is $1,800. And now let's cut off a piece and see, did we get the taste right? Yes, it's tasty and about 80% close to the original flavor, but the texture, it's exactly the same stretchiness. Obviously, there's no way we can eat this much gummy ourselves, so we're going to share it with children in need. And so we're going to wrap it in plastic for transport. Now, to move this giant gummy bottle, we need a hydraulic pallet jack. To deliver the gummy to the kids, I arranged for a truck with a hydraulic lift. I think they're pretty amazed. To serve the gummy properly, we need a table and some cutting boards. We're gonna slice off small pieces from the giant bottle. And then to make it easier to eat, we're going to cut those into smaller chunks. Then we portioned it out. To speed things up, the older kids jumped in to help. Now that that's done, we can hand out our homemade Coca-Cola flavored gummy candy. Judging by their reactions, the kids really liked it. And if this video gets 150,000 likes, the food from the next video will also go to the children. See you next time.